Welcome to week 2 of Solo Shift. I'm Squirrel Patrol. I'm joined by JM to win from 1 week season. JM, I had one of my most frustrating weeks of fantasy sports ever last week in week 1. I had Anthony Richardson tagged all week and Joe Mixon tagged all week on RotoGrinders, along with Mike Evans, who had a big game. We talked about them on the show last week on the Sunday morning show. They asked me for a touchdown call, and a guy that had started to grow on me during the week is Alec Pierce. He's a guy, and I think it comes from reading 1 week season. You guys have been really high on him in the past. I think you've even termed him a guy that's going to win someone a million maker, someday.
That's definitely me saying that too. And I eventually gave up on him.
Yeah.
But I said it was so much confidence and certainty for a while too. It was like, this dude is going to, all they do is throw him downfield. He's going to hit some big scores.
Yeah. I even, in my notes from last week's show, I have a thing that ask Jam about why is everybody on AD Mitchell instead of Alec Pierce? But they asked me for a touchdown call on the show Sunday morning. I said Alec Pierce, and he went out and got the first touchdown on Sunday morning. I had the combination of Anthony Richardson, Joe Mixon, and Alec Pierce in exactly 0 rosters on FanDuel, and that's what won the $1 million. But how was your week?
Yeah, well, that's you were so I was close, but I didn't have Alec Pierce, right? Nobody did, but I didn't have Alec Pierce, but you were actually close. It was one of the, it was there were 12 skill position players last week who topped 20 DraftKings points. That's it. That's insane. So most of my quarterback pool was over 60% of my quarterback pool was Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, and Anthony Richardson. Joe Mixon, who I got onto he was just on my hedge bets, right? From before you and I had our show. And we talked last week about I was going to cut this show out of my schedule because I was I'm so busy on Thursdays, Fridays. And then I was well, that just it's not about the show. It's just the conversation with Squirrel is so valuable because there's 7-8 weeks out of the year, you mentioned somebody and I'm oh yeah, it just clicks, right? So Mixon, James Conner were my highest owned running backs. Tons of J.K. Dobbins, obviously tons of Texans wideout. So Nico and Diggs, who both top 20 points, and tons of Tyreek Hill. So yeah, it was one of those weeks where it's throughout the day Sunday, because week 1 is so unpredictable, right? So throughout the day Sunday, I was just kind of we did pretty solid. Most of the day, my winnings, I ended up breaking even. Most of the day, my winnings were showing 7x my buy-ins, right? And it was it's not going to finish there, but I'll finish at profit. And we were pretty solid this week. And then when I zoomed out, it was oh man, we were I was literally on everything that hit, and it just didn't come together on a roster together on everything that hit except Alec Pierce. So yeah, it was a fine week from a standpoint of results. I was judge things based on the OWS community as a whole. I think we were definitely profitable, but it was also a week where it's based on what we were on and how far ahead of the field we were on some things, it should have been a bigger week than it was. And rosters just didn't come together that way. So yeah, I was happy with week 1, but looking forward to a week where everything kind of comes together on a roster and we get all that money.
Yeah, I agree. So looking ahead to this week, it's a big slate. I was actually thinking that this is about as big as it can get. 13 games on DraftKings. FanDuel is even including the Sunday night game. So I know we don't see 14 game slates anymore because there were so many island games. We got the Saturday games, the Thursday games, the Tuesday games,
London games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
even 13 is really, really rare these days.
Yeah, but I still feel it's a slate that's defined somewhat by who's not on it. We don't have Josh Allen. We don't have Jalen Hurts. We're likely not going to have Christian McCaffrey, not going to have Tyreek Hill, no Bijan Robinson. So a lot of the guys who are the most expensive at their positions are not on the slate. And that gives us a lot of different opportunities. I was actually looking at some of my dummy builds, and I'm getting to a lot of guys I don't normally get to because they're priced right below Tyreek Hill or priced right below Josh Allen. And so I think that makes it an interesting week, but we also have some big chalk pieces as well. And I can think of 3 big chalk pieces in particular. Any initial thoughts on the week?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, right? It's it's defined by who's missing. And then I was there's only 3 games missing, right? So then it's also kind of defined by the nature of these matchups where, Seattle's going to New England and it's New England probably does have a top 5 to 8 defense, right? And then you got like the Jets against Tennessee, and it's like, well, what is Will Levis going to be able to do against the Jets defense? And so like, how aggressive does the Jets offense have to get? And then you like, or like where you got a really bad defense, the Giants are like a really bad secondary, Washington's a really bad secondary, but they're playing each other. So like their offenses aren't great. And can they stay on schedule and actually put up a bunch of points? And so it's just like a lot of spots where like the teams that might be able to, the teams that could score a lot of points in the right game environment aren't necessarily in the right game environment. The Jags are another team where it's like, oh, in the right game environment, if they give up a lot of points, they can score, but they're playing Cleveland this week and Indianapolis, right? Like, well, they're playing the Packers, and the Packers have Malik Willis, who he's taking a sack on like a good 20% of his NFL dropbacks. So it's like, it's just a weird week where a lot of the games, even the teams that are on the slate, they kind of line up in a way where you're like, where's the upside? So yeah, for me, my lists, like I've got like a top 4 at running back that's in a different tier than the rest of the running backs. And like the next group of my running back pool, it's like I've got 4 or 5 guys on it, but there's like 8 or 9 guys that could be on that list, and then like my quarterbacks is like last week, it was like most of my exposure was to Josh Allen, Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels, Sam Darnold. This week, it's like, I don't like, there's nobody I want 40% of at quarterback, it's like, and so wide receiver, I've got some clear guys I really like, but it just feels like a weird week where yeah, it's like nothing really separates that much on this slate is how I feel this week.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the slate, and it didn't initially strike me that it was this big because there's a bunch of games I'm interested in just crossing off. Like there's a bunch of games, like I don't know if I'll play something from Pittsburgh, Denver, a lot of these games, like the Indianapolis Green Bay game. There's just games I'm not interested in. The Chargers, Carolina, the Chargers defense, maybe. And then, I started writing my article for this week, and I start with a quarterback section, and the initial headline for my quarterback section was, I don't feel strongly about anybody. And I might my quarterback pool might be defined more about trying to avoid chalk. I think if there is chalk, I think it's going to be Patrick Mahomes and Jaden Daniels. And so I kind of poked some holes in both of those guys. Like Mahomes, I think, has scored over 21 DraftKings points once since last October, and it was in the Super Bowl. I'm not sure about the rest of the playoff games, but the regular season, I don't think he scored over 21 DraftKings points after October. It's like a multifaceted Chiefs offense where you never know where the scoring is going to come from, and that's a nightmare for fantasy football. Like I want to know exactly where the scoring is going to come from. And then Jaden Daniels, there's definitely rushing upside. He's definitely underpriced, but like if that rushing upside doesn't hit, like if he didn't score 2 rushing touchdowns last week, we're probably having a different conversation about him. And then there's so many other guys that are like playing indoors in high total environments. I've seen Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, Baker Mayfield. There's a whole list of guys that you can get to. I think Daniel Jones is potentially going to see some ownership, especially paired with Malik Neighbors. But he's so underpriced, 5,300. Sam Darnold, I don't like. Sam Darnold is fitting into the Kirk Cousins role where everybody wants to play Justin Jefferson. Nobody ever wants to play his quarterback. And then his quarterback is really, really cheap. So yeah, there's a whole list of guys I think you can get to and just pair them with their receivers, pair them with their run back. It may not be a complicated week for me.
Yeah, you talk about the Patrick Mahomes thing, right? That goes to what we talked about last week with like that second bet down the line is even if Mahomes has a big game, how confident are you, A, that you're going to pick the guy who's going to hit, and B, that like the price tags on these Kansas City pass catchers is really kind of ridiculous, right? It's like what are the chances that they're going to hit at a high enough level for this combined stack, right? Whereas something like Justin Jefferson, it almost like you're not necessarily playing Darnold, you're playing Jefferson, right? And it's like if Jefferson hits, Darnold's got like a good 60 to 70% chance of hitting at that price tag. So then you just say, okay, that takes care of my quarterback position there. Somebody in that same game who's not really being talked about is Brock Purdy, who averaged over 20 DraftKings points a game last year, and he's 6K. And it's like so frequently he's in this 22 to 26 point range. So yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think my fear is always, the Goffs, the Staffords, the Purdys. It's like, what if one of these, like, they're probably, Baker went for 30 points last week, 28 points last week, right? That's not typically going to happen. He threw 4 touchdown passes. So like what they're typically going to get is like 22 to 24 to 26. And then what happens if one of these rushing guys puts up 35? That's always the fear, is that one of these rushing guys puts up a big game. I think Daniel Jones can kind of cover your bases a little bit with that. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I like you said, like nothing really stands out. I think it's somewhat easy to avoid. Like Jaden Daniels will still be on my list, but like it's somewhat easy to avoid, to make cases against the chalk. It's also just, you can make cases against the guys you like too. And so since Jaden Daniels can actually separate, like he's 6,200, he could put up 30 because he can throw the ball too, and he can throw it downfield. The problem is Cliff Kingsbury is going to be like, all right, throw a 5-yard out and another 5-yard out. And let's do a 5-yard hitch this time. But yeah, I'm with you, man. Like I think that, and Kyler too, I think, is a guy that like, he's got the rushing upside, but he didn't score 2 touchdowns last week on the ground. So people are kind of like forgetting that he has that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways you could go at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I think the Jaden Daniels thing is interesting. I'm going to spend the whole season, especially because I live in the Washington, D.C. area, wishing that Jaden Daniels could play against the Commanders defense because then he could make a splash and skip the trip to Vegas. Splash Sports hosts NFL Survivor and pick'em pools every week, available in 34 states and Canada. Start with their $1 million Survivor pool in week 2. Pick one winning team each week for a chance at $1 million. But remember not to use the same team twice. Join us in week 2 for the RotoGrinders Survivor Revival Tournament. It's just a $20 entry with over $20,000 to be won, plus RG premium prizes for the top 20. Check the links in our description for more details. Oh, it's right there. So 2 guys you mentioned there, in addition to Daniels, but I do think that Kyler Murray is interesting because he kind of fits in between the 2 molds. There's the passing-oriented quarterbacks that are a little bit cheap and are playing indoors and are in high total games. There's also some rushing quarterbacks like Anthony Richardson, Lamar Jackson, that I wish were in better spots. Like Daniel Jones even fits this category. I wish they were like playing indoors, but they're good quarterbacks who can put up massive scores. I feel like this might not be the week to use them. Kyler Murray's kind of in between there, where he does have the rushing upside. He's in the high total game indoors. And I'm interested in one of his receivers and also, his tight end. But then Brock Purdy is actually an interesting guy I hadn't thought of, because we're going to see Jordan Mason chalk, most likely. And the thing that scares me about Jordan Mason, I think I want to be under the field on Jordan Mason chalk, because he's definitely underpriced. He definitely makes a lot of things work on your roster, but he has very little receiving involvement.
Right.
And so what happens if it's just a game for the San Francisco receivers? That's a really interesting play, to kind of flip the chalk build on its head, right? Like if you play Brock Purdy with one of his receivers or 2 of his receivers, and you don't have Jordan Mason on that roster, that's a way that Jordan Mason could fail. I haven't looked. Kind of thinking of it now, I haven't looked at how the pricing would work out, but Purdy is never as expensive as he should be. So I think that's an interesting call, and kind of leads us into the running back discussion as well.
Yeah. I mean, in Purdy, you pair him with Debo, who, if we know if, Debo will be popular, but like if CMC's out, Debo also takes on kind of that CMC pass catching role in a way. And so you're able to still take advantage of CMC being out, but do it in a way that other people aren't doing it. And, I don't know. It's also interesting, I guess, to note, like last week we had these 4 guys who scored 28 plus DraftKings points, and then like everyone else scored 15 or fewer. So it was just a massive gap. But typically, like, you're not gaining a huge edge at quarterback, right? Like Purdy scores 24, 26, and like a bunch of other guys are scoring 18, 19, 20. They're all kind of in that same range, but it still just gives you that little bit of kick kind of around the field, doing something a little bit different. So and to your point, like this week is so, like, there's so little that just clearly separates the position that it's a good week to be like, well, what about this that people aren't thinking of that can also kind of score in that range?
Yeah, I think we're going to see concentrated ownership, and I think it might even be around. I think it's definitely going to be around Jordan Mason, Breece Hall, Cooper Kupp on DraftKings are going to be, in probably FanDuel as well. 3 very highly owned position players. I think Patrick Mahomes is probably going to see pretty heavy ownership, like double-digit ownership at the quarterback position, potentially along with Jaden Daniels. And so I think it's a good week to play the what-if game. I do the Sunday morning show with Eric Beinpour. We used to do a show on qualifiers, but we used to say that we could have the name of the show be, but what if, because we just sit there and talk about chalk and say, yeah, but what if, this happens instead? What if the San Francisco passing game is, lighting up the scoreboard and they don't need Jordan Mason? So I think it's a good week to get away from the chalk. It's just difficult to get. So Jordan Mason with limited receiving work, I'm comfortable getting away from. Breece Hall is a more difficult guy to get away from, because I was actually putting together some like prop market comparisons at the running back position, and there actually isn't not much comparison to Breece Hall. Like he's underpriced, and gets so much receiving game work, and I think one of the leading rushing yards prop lines on the week, but he's also not in a high total game. So any thoughts on Breece Hall, or is he just guy that you think you got to eat some of the chalk?
No, yeah. I mean, I think Breece Hall is underpriced relative to his workload at the running back position, but also the running back position is pretty universally overpriced relative to the wide receiver position. Like I still think that 7,400 goes a longer way at wide receiver than at running back, just generally speaking, right? And not necessarily exactly 7,400, but like if you're playing Breece Hall, that makes it harder to get up to these 8K wide receivers that you kind of like the ceiling on a little bit more. So, Breece Hall, it's one of that's the challenge this week is the salary allocation, because there's not, I mean, that's why I'm probably higher on Jordan Mason than you, because like you don't need 25 points from him. You need like 15 points from him, and then it frees up salary to attack more high-priced wide receivers. But not if I'm going Jordan Mason plus Breece Hall, which is like the most obvious thing that everybody's gonna do. It's more like if I'm going Jordan Mason and like Jaleel McLaughlin, and then I'm able to be like, and I'll hammer extra high-priced wide receivers other people don't have. But no, I mean, I like Breece Hall. I think Kyren Williams is, to me, Kyren Williams is the best running back play on the slate. Because Blake, the big question is, like, they want to keep him healthy. Is Blake Corum going to eat into his role? Blake Corum had 0 touches. So Ronnie Rivers is a breather back, but he's not a guy who they're going to be like, and now Ronnie Rivers is going to go and take over the game. It's like he's going to go in to keep Kyren healthy. But and then me, this kind of like Kyren plus Cup together is just such a sharp way to play it, right? I think it was the 10 healthy games that Kyren played last year. If you just take the top 2 scores from like Kyren plus top Rams wide receiver, it was basically like 3x to 4x 90% of the time, their combined salary for this week. So it's just like, it's almost like getting, if Justin Jefferson scored 27 to 36 points 90% of the time, and you're like, yeah, I would roster that, So we talk about coming off a week where 12 guys topped 20 DraftKings points, and like these two should average 20 DraftKings points between them. So to me, the way to deal with the Rams chalk is to be like, okay, sure. Like Achane and Tyreek last week. I think we talked about it on the show. Like, sure, you guys will all play Tyreek. You guys will all play Achane. I'll play them together. And when both of them hit, like I move ahead of both sides of those roster builds.
Yeah, so I did a show with Blender this morning, and we had a question that was, can you play Kyren Williams and Cooper Kupp together? And I said, I love the idea of playing them together, because I can see them, they get their points in somewhat different ways. I can see Cooper Kupp, getting 20 targets again, 14 receptions, 100-something yards, and just going out at the 1-yard line twice. And Kyren Williams coming in and running, going, I can't believe Kupp went out at the 1 again, and then Kyren Williams runs the ball into the end zone. You're betting on the game environment. I think you could see a situation where one of them hits and the other doesn't, for cash games. But I could also see a situation where they elevate each other and that entire game environment goes off. So it's interesting. At that price tag, I probably like Kyren Williams the most.
Yeah, I agree. And Debo might have the highest, like the higher chance of like a 35 to 40 point game. Although that might not even be true. So this is actually even more interesting. Check this out. So there was 10 games where Kyren played last year, and for 6 of those, Kupp and Puka were healthy. In the 4 games that Kupp missed, there was a game where Kyren and Puka combined for 61.1 and the game where they combined for 65. Like, they are the offense, and Sean McVay is comfortable doing that. And like, not only are the Cardinals, PFF's 32nd ranked defensive line, linebacking unit, and secondary, but they're also favored in this spot. So it's like the expectation is that this is a game throughout, right? I just think like it's just such a sharp way to, because even like the low end scenario is typically going to be they combine for like 47 points. And it's like, oh, that's still pretty good. Like you can still win a tournament with 14.4K in salary getting you that many points. And then, 2 spots are secured. So yeah, I mean, to me, that's my starting point at running back. Then I branch out from there.
Yes, it's one of my favorite game environments to target. And if you're looking for a plus EV contest this NFL season, our friends over at Action Network have one for you. Their podcast called The Favorites is bringing back their free NFL Pick'em contest this season. Totally free to sign up at favorites.actionnetwork.com. Just 5 picks against the spread every week. Cash prizes for the top 10 finishers. $40,000 first place prize, $100,000 prize pool, thousands up for grabs each week. Again, totally free to play. Contest just went live. Just go to favorites.actionnetwork.com to sign up and compete for this $100,000 prize pool. I'm actually not joking that it's my favorite game environment to target. And I actually think the Cardinals side is going to be underplayed. I really like the idea of getting to some Trey McBride, and some of that is just the relatively low opportunity cost at the tight end position. Somebody that's really grown on me starting like late last night, Marvin Harrison. It seems like he's going to go totally overlooked.
Yeah.
People wanted to line up to play him last week. And, I was saying like guys in their first NFL game often don't, and like why, like Jameson Williams just torched this team. Just, and yeah, the Cardinals are favored. That was actually something that was surprising to me because I was looking at all these Rams players I want to play. It's even like DeMarcus Robinson, Tyler John, like these guys are underpriced. And I think that might be a factor of the Sunday night injury, right? Like pricing's already set.
Right.
But these Cardinals guys, and James Conner, I think somebody you're always high on.
Always.
I love the idea of like overstacking this game because it could be close. The Cardinals are actually the favorite team, indoors environment. There is a lot to like here.
Yeah, I mean Marvin Harrison. There's 2 guys. Marvin Harrison's one. Amari Cooper's another. Amari has scored 27.6 or more DraftKings points in 3 of his last 8 games with Deshaun Watson. So like, I don't care how bad Deshaun Watson has looked. He's looked that bad for all these games with Amari, and Amari has still produced 9 targets last week. Njoku's out. These 2 guys, like I was looking through who's like sub 3% owned that really stands out, and those are the 2 guys like Amari and Marvin Harrison. Because like Marvin Harrison was drafted in the top 5 picks. He's drafted to be like a focal point of their offense. More often than not, he's going to have 10 target games, and this could be a high scoring game. And he's going like completely overlooked. So yeah, I mean, I think that I think it's a super sharp call and a super sharp way to play it because like, okay, Kyren will be popular, Kupp will be popular, but the combination of Kyren and Kupp will not be popular. And then the combination of Kyren and Kupp plus Marvin Harrison is just going to be like you and me playing it and a few people who have watched our content, and that's it. So it's like, I just think it's a really sharp way to take advantage of a slate where it's like, and we can even say it like this, like you and I are talking about, like you can make a case for a lot of different places, right? So then you could either just like spread yourself so thin that if you get things right, it doesn't matter anyway, because like you don't have enough elements lining up, or you could just be like, okay, let's pick a spot and really focus on that one. So I think, obviously this is solo ship. Technically it's a single entry show, which I think for both of us, single entry is more about like, okay, who's our highest confidence plays and get a lot of them onto a roster with like 1 or 2, like maybe high upside, longer shot plays. But yeah, like in terms of finding our most confident spots, to me, it's this game. And I hadn't even thought about the idea of overstacking that far with like Connor on it as well. But yeah, I mean, then you're like 0% ownership and just betting on this game environment. Throw Kyler on and fill out the roster from there.
I think this is a week I'm more comfortable than other weeks being totally different in single entry. Because I think you're going to see a lot of single entry rosters with Patrick Mahomes, like Rashee Rice, and betting on that game environment, which is not one that I'm as confident is going to take off. I like the idea of getting really different in single entry. Maybe playing like Kyler Murray, Rams, Cardinals stack. Maybe playing like Dak Prescott, but then you've got Rams pieces. Like if you can get CeeDee Lamb and Dak on a roster, there's a bunch of Saints players that I think could hit. That's another game environment I'm interested in. But then also on that roster, maybe you're playing like some Lions and Bucks pieces, or some Rams and Cardinals pieces. I think it's a really good week to just pick a different quarterback in single entry, and then mix together some of the pieces from these other game environments. And actually, getting back to somebody that you mentioned Amari Cooper. I'm interested in two other Browns, which is Jerome Ford and Jordan Akins. I think Jerome Ford consistently gets overlooked. That like Nick Chubb's not coming back probably until potentially December. If it was a bad knee injury, and so Jerome Ford is the main guy there. He's priced in Jordan Mason range. I think he's $700 more expensive, and he gets receiving work. And then the other Brown I'm interested in is Jordan Akins. But it is probably going to go somewhat overlooked that David Njoku is out this week, just because everyone's completely off Cleveland offense. But it could make an impact. And I think there's going to be additional receptions and usage to go around. And it's an interesting question. Is it going to maybe go to Jerome Ford, to Jordan Akins, or to Amari Cooper? And is one of those guys going to have a big game?
Yeah. Jerome Ford, I've been back and forth on him. He's kind of in this pool of like, all right, I'm picking these four as my like second tier of running back, but I could also put this guy in and take this guy out, put this guy, like Jerome Ford has been on and off my list at that like edge of the running back list. And what I'll probably do in the player grid is just end up like saying, hey, any of these guys could also go on the list. Like on my show with Pete earlier, I was like, you know what? Najee Harris probably does go on the list. It's like this back end of the running backs is pretty much like overlaps across the board. My argument against Jerome Ford had been like Deontay Foreman had like one snap last week and 0 touches. But what about in the game environment where they control things? And not to say that they will control this, but if it's closer, like Deontay Foreman might take on that, ground and pound type role. And 17 or 16 touches, 17 touches, whatever it was for Jerome Ford last week. But no, I mean, I think you're right. Like he's a perfectly sharp way to play this spot. I don't know that he separates, but I don't know that any of these running backs do, right? So he'll have enough touches with enough pass game work that he's a solid option there. And then, I think Jordan Akins, I think Mike Gesicki, if we played out this slate 100 times, Gesicki probably hits for like 20-point games more times than Jordan Akins does. Gesicki's gone for 18 plus points in like 9% of his career games, in spite of like that awful season in New England last year and Mike McDaniel not knowing how to use him the year before that, right? It's like, he's capable of hitting. Jordan Akins I think he has a couple 25 pointers on his ledger, but it's like, that's less likely to happen. But I think that both those guys are solid ways to save salary. In fact, I don't think there's much separation between those guys and like the cheaper wide receivers. You know what I mean? Like you could play Gesicki and Akins, or Taysom Hill and Gesicki, or Taysom Hill and Akins, or whatever. Like you play two cheap tight ends on a roster, and it's kind of the same as playing a cheap tight end and the cheap wide receiver, because they could actually outscore those cheap wide receivers this week.
Gesicki's interesting because I think, Yoshivas is probably going to see some ownership again this week. And assuming T. Higgins is out, he's going to project well. He's seen an increase in price, but it's still probably not enough. But only 3,100. He's a guy that I ended up playing in our listener league in RotoGrinders. Each show has to do an entry, and I ended up with Gesicki at tight end. Speaking of the listener league, don't forget to join in the fun each week with RG's listener league and play alongside other viewers as well as your favorite hosts. You'll have a chance every week to compete for first place and win yourself a month of RG Combo Premium. Check our description for an invite to the contest. So also looking at the cheaper wide receivers. So somebody I'm ending up on a lot of rosters. I've got him on my one big best ball team that I did, the Jalen McMillan for Tampa Bay. I think he's projecting much better for the price than I was kind of expecting. And I think that's another game and environment that could really go off. That's one we didn't talk about as much as the Arizona Cardinals, the Arizona Rams game. But I think it's one that I might be playing just as much. I like the idea of playing some Amon-Ra St. Brown. McMillan's a guy that saves you a lot of salary then without having to necessarily go to Jerome Ford. But any thoughts on that game in particular?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really like about that game is I forget what it was, but I think it was Goff had 2 of his 3 or 2 of his 4 highest pass attempts of the season last year against Tampa, because that's what Tampa does, right? They force teams to the air. And so corresponding with that, St. Brown had 2 of his 3 or 2 of his 4 highest target games of the year against Tampa. And then now he's coming off of a 6 target game where you would think they would want to be like, hey, like, let's get St. Brown going in this one. So I think that lines up nicely. You know, the thing with him is like in most situations, he's not going to have a 45-point game in his range of outcomes, right? And so you're to play him, you're fading CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp more than likely, right? And so if one of those guys gets that 40-point game, then you're falling behind because St. Brown has 28 points or something like that. But I think that can also fall into the bucket of overthinking things. I think he's just a really sharp play. And if you're building around the game environment, he just fits in with that thesis. Jalen McMillan, I see him more as like a Trey Tucker type. And like, he's probably not going to get more than 3 or 4 targets most games, but maybe I'm misreading that. You know, and also in my head is still Dave Canales last year, who's no longer with the Bucs, like interrupted. He was asked about Cade Otton and his development. He's praising Cade Otton and then interrupted himself to go, look, you don't design plays for Cade Otton. You design plays for Mike Evans. You design plays for Chris Godwin. And if those guys are covered, then you go to the third read from there. So that this offense is not necessarily going to operate like that, but Liam Cohen does come from that Rams tree where it's like, we're going to focus on Cooper Kupp. We're going to focus on Puka Nacua. You know, if those guys are covered, we'll go to other guys. So I could be misreading the Jalen McMillan situation. That's how I've been treating it, is like he's going to get 3 to 4 targets per game, right? He had 3 last week. But if you're stacking around that game, I think it makes sense because you're just then it really doesn't matter if he has like 3 points, because if you get the game environment right, you're still benefiting in other places. And that's kind of part of how you have to build around game environment sometimes.
Yeah, the coach doesn't realize how underpriced he is on DraftKings. we need him to have a big game to save money on our rosters. So yeah, just to wrap things up a little bit, I do think we should think about the idea that it's week 2, and before the season, we kind of talk about week 2. We think we know a lot of stuff we still don't know anything. Like we know just a little bit more than we knew week 1. And so I will say, I think if there's a theme to the guys that I'm interested in this week, especially the wide receivers, it's guys that maybe didn't have the biggest game last week, but that we can still expect big games from. Like CeeDee Lamb is a guy that had to face the Browns passing defense last week, and he didn't put up a massive game. This week they're playing at home against New Orleans, and New Orleans might have looked a little bit better, the defense, than it really is facing the Panthers, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown, somebody that kind of took a back seat last week. I'm definitely interested in him this week. And then Marvin Harrison, a guy that I've never seen a guy get forgotten about so quickly.
Quickly.
Yeah, and you would think, number 4 draft pick, had a disappointing first game. Maybe they're starting, proactively saying, all right, this is a guy we have to get involved this week before, trouble starts brewing or people, start saying what's wrong. We want to get this guy involved, get his confidence up, and it seems like a really good environment to do it. Any closing thoughts on the week from you?
I'm glad we had this chat. I mean, that's why we do it, right? It's like, it's valuable for both of us and hopefully valuable for viewers as well. But I think it helped me. It's first off, it's nice to hear you echo what I've been seeing with this slate. And then, I think that just from a pure strategy perspective, we were able to kind of sharpen things a little bit more deeply here, because this week does seem to be less about the plays and more about the strategy, because there's genuinely just a lot of plays that sort of overlap in terms of like our level of confidence in them hitting. And so then it moves away from predicting and more toward, because like I always say, DFS is not about predicting. It's about understanding probabilities and positioning yourselves to take advantage of those probabilities in such a way that you make profit over time. But predicting is still a component of it. And sometimes we can be better than the field of predicting. And I don't think this is a week where that's going to be much of the edge. So then it just shifts over to how can we move around? And then one other thing I'll note is you said the thing about, guys who didn't hit last week. And I think it's important to remember that DraftKings, there's like the rare exceptions. There's Tyreek Hills and Justin Jeffersons who like hit at a higher rate and they're priced so high that DraftKings isn't going to bump their price much higher. But generally speaking, players hit. DraftKings sets up their pricing such that players hit roughly 4x their salary, roughly 20 to 25% of the time. So it's like the guys who hit last week, if they stay healthy all season, they will probably hit 3 to 4 times all season. which means the chances of them hitting again this week are not that high, right? But everybody, like, we're coming off week 1 and people are like, this guy hit last week, like I want to go to him, or this guy missed last week, I want to go to him. And it's just like the perspective on these players is so different because we only have 1 week sample size. You got to zoom out and take what you know from DFS as a whole and NFL production as a whole and realize like the guys who hit last week are probably less likely to hit, and the guys who didn't hit, NFL defenses, right? Like the Bills double teamed Marvin Harrison all game last week. Like, are the Rams going to be like, we have to do the same thing? Or they watch the tape and it's like they're not thinking quite as much about double teaming him, and he ends up having an opportunity to hit a lot of one-on-one matchups and pick up some big gains. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm excited about this week, but I'm interested by this week, and glad we got this chat today.
Yeah, me too. So yeah, that'll do it for week 2 of Soloship. Good luck to everybody, and we'll see you next week.
I'm going to be honest, Squirrel, that was so fast. I didn't expect you to get out of here that quick. And so I'm just going to vamp a little bit because I'm going to find the solo ship. But great show, you guys. You were awesome. And we'll see you next time, everybody.